Welcome to ILTV On The Hour. We're live in Israel bringing you the biggest headlines from the region. It's currently 2 p.m. here in Israel and 7 a.m. in New York. I'm Sivan Raviv, and today is day 697 of the war in Gaza. Let's get into all the top headlines at this hour. Israel is forcefully rejecting accusations from an international body of scholars claiming Israel's actions in Gaza amount to genocide. The Israeli Foreign Ministry denounced the resolution by the International Association of Genocide Scholars as a shameful distortion rooted in Hamas propaganda, and it warned it undermines the very definition of genocide. The resolution, passed with 86% approval among the association's members, argues that Israel's campaign meets the criteria under the 1948 UN Convention. Israel insists its military operations target Hamas, not civilians, and stresses that aid continues to flow into Gaza under international oversight. Still, the declaration adds to the mounting legal and diplomatic pressure on Israel following South Africa's genocide case at The Hague and a chorus of criticism from humanitarian groups. Now joining me here to discuss all of this is Lieutenant Colonel in Reserves Advocate Maurice Hirsch, Director at IPAR. Thank you very much, Maurice, for joining.
Hi, good afternoon.
So, Maurice, I'd like to begin with Trump's comments that Israel's ongoing war in Gaza is damaging its global image and that it's losing the war on PR. Now, we here in Israel often feel this as well. How is it that Israel is losing the war on public opinion? Pretty much from the get-go.
Well, so I think the problem is that the institution of propaganda, starting with Hamas through the international press, is automatically biased against Israel. Just take, for example, the front page of the New York Times. They publish a picture of an ostensibly starved child in the knowledge that the picture that they are presenting to the world is just a lie. They know that they're talking about a child who suffers from genetic diseases, not suffering from starvation, and yet it doesn't bother them. And that really what we're seeing at the moment, and really throughout the war, is the living proof of the old adage that a lie can travel halfway around the world before the truth even gets its boots on. And that's what we're seeing. The use of propaganda, of lies to besmirch, to defame, and to delegitimize Israel, even in the knowledge that what is being claimed simply isn't true. So how do you then fight that? How do you fight against a lie that wasn't true when it started and will never be true? And can you ever successfully push back as a democracy, law-abiding democracy, when you're faced with that type of PR?
Now, it's funny and interesting that on the other side, they say that all of these points and facts that you're bringing forth here, that they're Israeli propaganda.
Well, it's unbelievable to see how it constantly it's blaming the victim for the other side's malfeasance. They forget entirely that Hamas started this war. They forget entirely that after 697 days, the war could be over immediately, could end today if Hamas were to unconditionally release all of the hostages and just surrender. That is no part of the international discussion. It's no part of the media discussion. And yet they're choosing other paths. You mentioned it as part of the introduction. Belgium joining Macron in giving Hamas really the ultimate prize for the October 7 massacre. You murder, torture, rape, butcher, kidnap Jews. And the result is not international condemnation, but rather recognition for a non-existent state of Palestine. That is what they were pushing for all the time. And so now Macron and his merry band of Jew haters, and I don't say that lightly, are now adopting Hamas ideology, Hamas propaganda, and moving forward on the international stage to recognize a state that doesn't exist. They're flouting international law. They're flouting the requirements of the Montevideo Convention from 1931. And for what? To recognize a state that will be embodied by genocidal terrorism against the Jewish state. That's the only goal that they're going to achieve. They will not achieve peace. They will not achieve a two-state solution because the Palestinians do not want a two-state solution. They want the destruction of Israel, whether it be Hamas or the PLO-PA in Judea and Samaria.
Now, I always say to people who are advocating so fiercely for the Palestinian cause, if they invested even 10% of that passion into demanding for the hostages' release, that would benefit all sides, certainly Israel's, but also the Palestinians. This war would be over tomorrow.
And Sivan, you just have to sometimes look at one of the few instances that really do shine a very, very high projector on what we're dealing with. In October 2024, Prime Minister Netanyahu offered a $5 million reward and free passage around the world to any Gazan that brought us back a hostage. We're now almost a year later, no takers. No takers that want to run away from this alleged genocide. No takers that want to run away from the alleged starvation. They could be rich, living anywhere in the world. All they have to do is give up a hostage, and they're not willing to do that. I think that tells us worlds about the mindset of, unfortunately, of the Gazan people, of the Hamas terrorists that we're dealing with, and really how we can potentially move forward.
So let me ask you, back to Israel's public image. Does Israel's strategic military priority, obviously dismantling Hamas, returning the hostages, do you think that that comes at the expense of public diplomacy? Are there just too many fronts to handle at once, so public diplomacy is pushed aside?
I think that unfortunately the public diplomacy hasn't been run in the best way possible. We rarely saw an example of that also when this whole starvation libel came up. Suddenly Israel was able to say that in Kerem Shalom, in the passageway there are hundreds of trucks waiting just to be distributed to the Gazan population. Why weren't we saying that 3 weeks before, calling out the UN for its really support of Hamas and support of this libel of starvation? Why weren't we telling the world of the babies that Hamas then really pushed around the world as examples of the starvation of the babies that had been evacuated to Italy for medical treatment? All of these issues which we knew to use them to respond with should have been brought up along the way in order to avert the libels to start with. That's what we should have been doing. We're doing all of the right things. We're providing a tremendous amount of humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip. We're just not talking about it until we're backed into a corner. That, I would suggest, is not the right approach to have taken. We need to be explaining in a much more clear manner who exactly the terrorists are that have been killed. How do we break down the Hamas figures and libels of the death toll in Gaza, that they include natural deaths, that they include even the deaths of Gazans who were murdered by the genocidal terrorists themselves, preventing them from moving south as a result of misfired rockets? Why are we not actively undermining those numbers instead of remaining silent and saying, well, we've killed ex-terrorists alone? That's something that on all fronts, I think we could have spent a little bit of more time and energy promoting better explanations. I despise the words hasbara because that's explaining ourselves. We don't need to explain ourselves. What we're doing is right. We just need to present that picture to the rest of the world.
Now, how influential do you think is the current global public opinion to Israel's military decisions in Gaza? Is Netanyahu influenced?
I think there's a very, very big difference between what we're seeing in the international media as possibly as a reflection of what people are thinking, which is hysteria and Israel is doing everything wrong. When you actually look at the support for Israel on the ground in at least the normal societies, I think that Israel still enjoys great support in the goal to destroy Hamas, to free our hostages. And that is something which is an unwavering commitment because it's just a moral thing to do. And it's not talking about destroying the Gazans. We've never been interested in destroying the Gazans. We are interested in executing a war against the genocidal terrorists and freeing the hostages. And for that, I think we enjoy very widespread popular support around the world. And that almost every poll that's done, at least in the Western societies, shows that support for that goal specifically. So I think there's a Prime Minister Netanyahu is also taking that into account, that there's media and Hamas propaganda on the one hand, but then there's genuine belief in Israel's right to defend itself against Hamas and to free our hostages on the other hand.
Now, Israel's image, is this something that can be corrected in the aftermath of the war, do you think? Or do you think Israel and Israelis will pay the price for this for decades to come?
I think that there is going to be long-term, unfortunate consequences for this PR effort for Israeli soldiers, for Israel as a country. I fear that there are those that will, similar to recognizing the non-existent state of Palestine, will continue on with the libel, with the trope that Israel has acted in breach of international law, in breach of the laws of war in Gaza, when really the truth does tell a different story. But as we've seen, unfortunately, the truth doesn't really influence the mindset of these people. What they're interested in is delegitimizing and defaming Israel, irrelevant of the facts, irrelevant of the Israeli hostages being held by the Gazan terrorists. They don't even care about the Gazan people. If they actually cared about the Gazan people, they would be pushing Egypt to allow them to flee this war zone. Where is President Macron in his goal to delegitimize Israel and implement the two-state solution? Why is he not influencing Egypt to allow the innocent Gazans to flee? Why is he not pushing for the international community to take in the refugees from Gaza, as they have been from every other war zone? From Syria, there were millions of people who ran away. From the Ukraine, there were millions of people who ran away. The only place in the world where those refugees cannot run away, at the ambivalence of the international community, is the Gaza Strip. Why are they using the Gazans as pawns to attack Israel?
Very valid point. Now, many scholars, as we see, are coming out with a message that Israel is committing a genocide. This is a statement Israel has and is constantly refuting. But let's be clear here. Can you define what is genocide?
So genocide, according to the convention from the early late 40s, early 50s, is the intention to destroy in part or in whole a racial group, a national group. That's really the definition of genocide. It requires that you are carrying out mass murders of that group. You're destroying them just for being members of that group, not because they're terrorists, not because they're murdering Jews, not because they participated in the October 7 massacre, but solely for the purpose of destroying that national group. Now, if we look at that and what's going on in Gaza, unfortunately, we're looking at one of another series of these libels. Genocide in Gaza, according to UN numbers, this is the only genocide in the world where the attacker, where the organization, the country carrying out a genocide, has dropped more bombs than people killed. We are the most incompetent army in the world, and that's just from the bombs that have dropped from the sky. Never mind the hundreds of thousands of forces operating on the ground. We are the only genocide in history where we provided over 2 million tons of aid to the Gazan population. We're the only genocide in history, according to UN figures. Unfortunately, part of that lie is the UN, where the population of where the size of the population that is suffering the genocide is actually growing. If you believe the UN figures, there have been more than 150,000 births in the Gaza Strip since the war started. That's almost 3 times the number of people killed. That is unheard of in a genocide. These things don't go together with genocide. Where is that genocidal intention when you're feeding the population, when you're only targeting terrorists? And one of the Palestinian commentators made the claim that Israel has dropped 5 times the amount of bombs on Gaza as was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, 245,000 people were killed. Mm-hmm. So that would mean, in comparison, that in Gaza, there should have been over 1 million people killed. Right. Where Israel is carrying out the worst genocide possible, simply incompetent genocide. That is what we're seeing. And that's really the ridiculousness of this claim that's being made. It's irrespective of legal definitions. It's irrespective of the facts on the ground. And it's irrespective of even the number of deaths in the Gaza Strip.
Maurice Hirsch, thank you very much for all of this.
Thank you very much for having me.
That's it for this edition of ILTV On The Hour. We'll continue giving you the most important updates coming from Israel and the Middle East. I'm Sivan Raviv. Thank you very much for watching.